Coogs House. There's a lot of private equity talk in college football these days. Why? Plus, Willie Fritz and crew are doing their thing, but can you have too much of a good thing? Lots to talk about today.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. And if you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Make us your first listen each and every day. And if you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below, wherever you found this podcast, if you put the milk or the cereal in the bowl first. Controversial question in some households. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. We got more on that later today. We got a lot of things to talk about. I want to spend some time that Jarus Walker's rookie year is officially over after the Boston Celtics knocked off the Indiana Pacers the other night. Make sure we talk about that and contextualize that some. Before we get too far away from it, do it anyway. I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on that while I've got it in the final segment today. I do want to talk some about future depth charts because I think there's a common question around the social media circles about a log jam of sorts and where that could potentially be down the line amidst all this great recruiting news coming out of Willie Fritz's staff. But first and foremost, folks are really talking about the potential drawbacks of the House versus the NCAA case. Now, if you are not paying attention to things, hadn't heard us talk about the other day, House versus the NCAA is the court ruling a settlement came where the NCAA and institutions paying $2.7 billion with a B dollars, somewhat in back pay, but largely in covering the lack of compensation for college athletes over a long span of time at this point, really, right? And moving forward, it's looking like schools, as a result of the settlement, will be paying some portion of the dollars earned by institutions through athletics out in the forms of payments. The payments will be made in conjunction with Title IX or in coherence with Title IX, meaning that you'd be paying men and women equally as far as like the sports go. Obviously, like football and men's basketball be on the one side, and then you'd have to find women's sports and pay them something equal to match up to where all your male athletes and female athletes are making the same amount of money. And the number being floated out there is it looks like commonly being set at about $22 million per year per institution, being like a cap of sorts. And then obviously within that, you're going to split it evenly. And so that'd mean $11 million on the men's side and $11 million on the women's side. And I think a lot of people are taking this in a bad light for Houston. And I want to squash some of that because, yes, $22 million is a lot. But I don't think that's the bad part of this for Houston for a number of reasons. One, I think it's a lot to a Houston fan because we think of Houston and the dollars we commonly see with this institution as a pre-Big 12 program still, right? The Texas Tech's the world, the Baylor's the world. They can get into that $20 million. They can find that $20 million on a good competitive year. I think we both know that Houston can be more successful in that. It's got the resources. It's in the city. It's got all of these factors working for it that can make it make more money than a handful of those Big 12 schools that are already flirting with that amount. Further, in a Big 12 competitive sense, Houston's got no more struggles at getting to that than any other Big 12 school if you look across the conference, right? Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, they're all going to run into the same kinds of issues as Houston in getting that $22 million. So in terms of the conference itself, Houston's not a lot different, and that's the good thing, right? If you were, say, Mississippi State in the SEC, you'd have a problem, right? Mississippi State does not work with the same profit margins as an Alabama, and that's in their conference, as a Georgia, and that's in their conference. Houston, from a competitive standpoint, is on a much more reachable playing field very quickly with its competitors in this. The other thing I'll say that is this means your athletic department has to reward success, right? Successful programs in terms of championship dollars are what's going to get you to that $22 million as quickly as possible. And admittedly, I've talked about a couple different programs. The show mostly talks about football and men's basketball because, frankly, that's the thing you guys click on the most. If you want to click on other things, we can talk about other things, right? But there is a common critique amongst a handful of other programs. I'm not going to mention right now to belittle them, but people question if winning is the main priority in some sports on campus, right? Well, if as a department, Houston has to get to that $22 million in revenue to pay back to the players, then they need to prioritize winning because those units matter very quickly, right? That just simply becomes something you can't avoid, right? You can't just kind of halfway do something. You have to actually go in and try to win those things. I think Houston's got the ability to it. Again, the city of Houston has all the resources and literally the athletes to do those things. But prioritizing winning could be key for some of these. The real danger in this, and I talked a long time about the positives, we talked about the positives in previous episodes. The danger in this is that, honestly, some schools are looking to private equity to try and maximize their profits. And I don't mean to, I don't know what industry you're in sitting there or whatever, but Drew Weatherford and his private equity group have been meeting with some programs. He went to Florida State. I don't know if he's meeting with Florida State necessarily, but he's reportedly having said he's worked with some programs and talked to some programs at the front end already about how to maximize profits as a private equity firm for this in sports. And that is where this hurts Houston. Not the ruling itself, not the $22 million. Frankly, we've argued before, having a cap on what you can pay players actually helps Houston away because Houston can find a way to get to the cap in a way that if it were just, a no salary cap kind of thing, that'd be a lot more difficult. Private equity, though, changes this because private equity is going to come in and soak up so much value. The goal there is to maximize profits, right? That's what profit equity does. And what I don't think private equity will jive with college football or college sports very well about is there are too many factors in college sports that, from an economist point of view, are not rational, right? The amount of T-shirts a fan buys are not rational. It's the guy wants to wear Cougar red every Friday and have a different shirt for all 52 weeks of the year, right? The luxurious weight room, if it doesn't directly lead to winning, is not rational, right? Frankly, the cost of the hot dog, the quality of your food at the stadium is not necessarily rational. It's all going to be about finding ways to maximize profits. So what private equity is going to come in and do. And if schools were to go down that route, I would argue that obviously does turn things into bad for college sports as a whole, not just Houston. And I guess if that's the argument you're leaning into, maybe that's a different route. But when people talk about the dangers of this leading into things for Houston and whatever, the danger I see is about all of college sports and this leaning into maximizing profits on this, because frankly, college football has never been about maximizing profits. It's been about maximizing the amount of trash talk you can do at the water cooler on Monday, right? The whole point of this is to have this competitive thing with you and your buddies, and I'm a Houston person, you're a Baylor person, that person's a TCU person, and let's talk about college football this weekend, and let's talk about the 2024 Cougars, and let's talk about the big side. Like, that's the winning here. That's why boosters throw out bajillions of dollars on, just a string just to these institutions because they want to have those things to talk about, right? You need more money to get rid of the coach, do it. Whereas private equity, frankly, in maximizing profits, might not have gotten rid of the Daniel Holgerson contract because you could argue that over the span of the rest of that contract extension, firing him in the immediate future, the impact on winning doesn't necessarily mean the impact on dollars brought in because of money being spent on new facilities and suddenly you're talking about dollars and cents, not wins and losses, right? Now I understand this getting messy, and I understand I'm also not the private equity person. So if comment down below if you want to hear more about this, maybe bring on someone who does more private equity conversations on a daily basis. It's me as the history teacher talking about what I see private equity do to other industries, right? It maximizes profit in a way that kind of can soak some of the character out of it, and college football is all character. But as a whole, and this is where I'll leave this segment before moving into other things that are a little cheerier, I think, people are upset because this is changing fundamentally in whatever direction college sports. House versus NCAA and the settlement they've reached is in an effort to save college sports, because I don't think people are talking enough about how, had this case not been settled and gone to court, had the NCAA lost, and they probably would, based on the amount of discovery already revealed, the NCAA probably goes bankrupt. And then there's just no more college football. Like, the whole thing has to change to a different entity, not like revamped, revived, not existing anymore, right? And so I think, A, we're still operating in college football. That's a win for Houston. And B, college football as a system was a corrupt workplace, right? They were administration and coaches and a lot of people making a lot of money, millions of dollars, that were not the kids playing, right? Now, I understand an education is invaluable, right? Like, I'm not saying it's not I'm a teacher by day, right? Like, you don't have to tell me about the value of education. But I also understand how many hours the kids put in, right? And making the payment a legal dollar amount, it's long overdue. And if we had to strip it down and rebuild it to get back to a more just system, I think there's just going to be speed bumps along the way there. And this just feels like one of them. Now, I want to talk some of the second segment about a little bit, again, cheerier things, and some of the guys Houston's going to have that will be on campus making some of that money. However, that case ends up trickling on down to Houston's way. But first, we got to talk some about winning, because that's the ultimate goal in this, and that is winning over at FanDuel, because with FanDuel.com/locked on college, you get all kinds of different ways to win right now. It's a winner take all time in the NBA, NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, happier topics. I think there's a lot. So Houston signs Keyshawn Henderson on Monday, May 27th, Memorial Day. He has him commit, right? He's class 2026 quarterback. Notably, their big commit of the spring in the Willie Fritz era, since Willie Fritz came in the spring, started looking at 2025s, was Austin Carlisle, a athletic dual threat quarterback who just got put as a top, I believe I saw it was a top 10 dual threat quarterback in his class on a recruit board. That was the big commit in the 2025 class. And the big transfer was dual threat quarterback from Louisiana, Zion Chris. And I think a lot of people are trying to say, okay, wait a second here. We got a quarterback in the 2024 transfer class, in the 2025 high school class, 2026 high school class. Can we keep all of these guys happy? Is it actually possible to keep all these guys happy? Quarterback is unique in terms of football in that only one is on the field at a time. It's not like you can have a couple receivers and drop an offense where they all get the ball, or a couple running backs and drop an offense where they alternate carries or alternate series and kind of keep each other fresh. Or, you need two safeties on the field at a time, or, you have corner on each side of the field, or multiple pass rushers. You can't ever have too many of those. And you need two tackles. But quarterback, you've only got one. And so the question is, can you feed all of these mouths? Can you keep all of them happy? And I'm here to tell you, you can. I think there's a way this happens. So here's the thing. Donovan Smith is the starter in the fall of 2024. Okay, as the starter, you can still see Zion Chris come in different packages. His athleticism is undeniable. Again, all three of these guys are elite dual threat quarterbacks. Zion Chris is no exception. At 6'3", 210. He is pretty fleet of foot. I saw someone put out there, and I've been reporting because I saw it put out there. He's a 4-3 kind of guy, electric athlete with the ball in his hands. Didn't get to see a whole lot in the spring game because it's not that kind of an atmosphere, right? You don't hit the quarterback, so you don't get to run as much, yada, yada. So I think you see packages of him in 2024, but truthfully, his 2 years to start are kind of more 2025 and 2026. Those two falls, okay? But 2025, freshman comes on campus, Austin Carlisle, 5'10", a buck 85, another electric dual threat quarterback, a little bit smaller. I think the answer is simple. He redshirts 2025 as most quarterbacks do. And then you get to 2026. So 2025 is Zion's year. 2026, you'd have a senior Zion Chris, who is in his last year of eligibility. You'd have as I'm saying it, redshirt freshman Austin Carlisle, and a true freshman in Keyshawn Henderson. Okay. I think you obviously then redshirt Keyshawn because you want to save the long-term eligibility there. And so then you have a quarterback battle between Zion and Carlisle. I don't think it's that crazy to think that Carlisle sits that year and watches before he plays. And then you go into 2027 with a Carlisle versus Keyshawn quarterback duel. I would point out, too, for what it's worth, that if Keyshawn Henderson, as the number one rated athlete in the class of 2026 nationally, comes in, and he is the kind of athlete you have to get on the field in that freshman season instead of redshirting him, you could say, hey, for this season, you're a receiver. We got two guys dueling out at quarterback. We got to get you on the field. Next year, we're going to let you compete at quarterback, right? Fritz has that kind of relationship with his players. It's very, very clear already. Frankly, one of the reasons it looks like Keyshawn says that he committed to Houston in the first place is that his high school coach played for Coach Fritz in junior college at Berlin, small world. And ultimately, it sounds like hearing about that relationship and how strong that bond was enough to help seal the deal, right? Never mind that Sean Bell and the connections he had when he was trying to get Keyshawn to Baylor and right? I mean, Fritz has that kind of an aura about him. And so suddenly you're into 2027 where you're having a quarterback battle between Austin Carlisle and Keyshawn Henderson. Honestly, having two dual threat guys does mean one of them can play somewhere else. You have to have someone that can come in and play the quarterback if someone breaks a shoelace, obviously. I imagine at that point we're looking at two guys that are, both being recruited at other schools as athletes, in Austin Carlisle and Keyshawn Henderson, learning the offense and developing into a quarterback. By the fall of 2027, I imagine, I think it would be Keyshawn, but I imagine they're separating themselves some, right? I imagine you've had some run with, Carlisle's got a couple years under his belt in the program at this point. You got Keyshawn's had some moments on the field as a special teams receiver kind of guy at this point. You have a better idea of what's going to happen there. This is not the kind of logjam where all three guys are fighting to play on the field at the same time necessarily. The only year that could possibly happen is 2026. And for what it's worth, I think that it actually gets kind of punted down the line to 2027 where it's just two guys. I don't think you ever have a point here where we have more than two guys competing for the job. And I think we've seen plenty of programs, right, decide quickly between the two. Maybe not Houston last fall, but you've seen plenty of guys that have decided between the two fairly quickly. Now, I would say, and if you listen to the show for a long time, you know I'm a big fan of dual threat electric running quarterbacks. That's just my steez. I love the way those kinds of offenses function and run. I could also see this all playing out where Zion plays out his year next year in 2024 as a package guy and then either changes positions or goes. I could see Carlisle coming as a highly touted recruit, Keyshawn Henderson coming in as a highly touted recruit, Keyshawn being the highest touted recruit of the bunch here, coming in and kind of changing things up and then someone deciding to leave. But ultimately, I think that there is a path to where you see them all on the field at different points taking snaps. I also think for what it's worth, this is setting up for a great this first contract of Willie Fritz is going to finish out strong, right? Now, what do they each do well? Obviously, Zion having a lot more college experience is going to lead to making better decisions. As far as his mechanics and throwing goes, I think bigger, stronger, more veteran guy. You see him hit the sidelines with the ball better. Carlisle, I think, puts the ball over the middle better. But the deepest arm, especially relative to how old they are, is Keyshawn Henderson. And so that's where I kind of think you see a bunch of different talents happening. Now, Parker, you mean Keyshawn Henderson has the stronger arm than Zion Chris? We saw Zion Chris put the ball over 60 yards in the air last year. Yes, at Louisiana, Zion Chris did do that one play, and it made it was the farthest ball traveled in the air on a pass completed in college football last season. What I guess I mean more is that I've seen Keyshawn in a high school game put it 45, it was really more like 48 yards in the air earlier, in his sophomore year of high school. And as a sophomore in high school, right, proportionally, I'm looking at things a little bit differently. There you go back and watch some high school tape of Zion. He's not quite doing that, right? So I'm putting it relative to age there. Zion did put the ball further down the field. I should, probably admit that. But those different strengths, I think, play out in a couple different ways. And it's really about who strengthens their weaknesses, right, over the course of time. Zion's may, pop up differently. He covers a whole lot of his late read stuff with how good an athlete he is. We'll see if he can do that in the Big 12. But I'm watching his Louisiana tape. That's kind of what he does. Carlisle is simply, you're going to have to get him out of the pocket. He can throw it pretty well out of the pocket, looks like, but he's going to have to move the pocket, changes the offense up a whole lot. He's, it's just kind of the way quarterbacks that are a little bit smaller have to do this, right? They have to move the pocket around, hard to see around the offensive line a lot of times. And then, frankly, Keyshawn is translating from being, and he is, through his 7-on-7 stuff, the high-ranked athlete he is for a reason. I don't mean this to diminish that, but he's not playing at the highest level of high school football right now, right? So we're looking at translating what they're doing at LSSS into Big 12 football, and I think each of them gets on the field at some point, and I don't think this log jam is anything that people need to be worried about. Obviously, each of them will have their time to shine, and while it may take some waiting on the front end, that also means you're getting acquainted with the offense. You're learning the offense. We're getting really used to seeing freshmen come in and play right away, but truthfully, while it's happening more now than it did 10 years ago, that's not a thing that happens all that often in college sports, right? Especially not the quarterback position. After all, there's all the hubbub about the Manning kid in Austin. He got benched. He's not going to play as a sophomore either, right? I don't know. You could look across the country, right? Exception of Caleb, who's now going pro. That's just kind of the way things go, right? Frankly, we get Donovan because he didn't play as a freshman, and then other guys didn't play as freshmen. They had their own log jam there. That was a real log jam, right? At Texas Tech. I digress. I don't think this is that big a problem. People are bringing up it's a problem, and I don't think it is. Another thing I don't think is a problem is Jarus Walker being in the NBA. I want to reflect on his rookie season in the big leagues in a second. All right, I said I wanted to talk about Jarace Walker's rookie year now that it's officially over, because frankly, when I talked about it before it was over, I said I would. And also because frankly, I think he got a lot of unnecessary flack. So Jarace went to the NBA after 1 year at Houston and was a freshman phenom at Houston. I mean, impact freshman in a way that Kelvin Sampson does not typically have show up. Played almost 28 minutes per game. Had over 11 points, almost 7 rebounds. Pretty dynamic defender, guarded a lot of different positions very, very well. Had 6 blocks in a tournament game, right? Very memorable player, dominant defensive player in Houston. Goes pro, top 10 pick, picked up, I think it was 8th overall. I got it right here. 8th overall, technically by the Wizards, but traded to the Pacers on draft night with the trade that they knew about beforehand. Indiana Pacers take him. Coach Rick Carlisle and Kelvin Sampson have a lot of overlap, and a lot of different things to do similarly. And I said that one time, and someone commented, "But Carlisle hates playing young guys. That's not good for Jarace." Well, like Kelvin Sampson also doesn't like playing freshmen, right? There's something to how similar these two guys are. But Jarus shows up and plays in just 33 regular season games last year. And while he's in those games, he also gets just over 10 minutes. And a lot of people showed frustration with, like, he should have stayed, blah, 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 blah. Like, you typically want to holler at a person who's made the wrong decision. And I actually think he made the right decision. And I know that Indiana is an interesting spot for me to say that about, because he did just play 33 games and they got to the playoffs, and he, frankly, he played in, 9 of the games they played in the playoffs this year, and averaged less than 5 minutes per game across that 9 games. But he got to the Indiana Pacers, who were searching for a forward, right? The Pacers knew they had Tyrese Halliburton at point guard. The Pacers knew they were bringing in T.J. McConnell. The Pacers knew they had Miles Turner at center, right? They have a bunch of different pieces, Benedict Mathurin. They have a bunch of guys that fit in pretty well, right? They just didn't have a true versatile forward. So they bring in Jarace. They're bringing Obi Toppin. They're bringing Pascal Siakam mid-year. I mean, they're clearly trying to plug that hole because it's important to what they do. And what ended up happening is the Pacers bring in Pascal mid-season, champion, right? Second best player on a finals team, won the whole thing, came in from Toronto in the Toronto fire sale mid-season, and ultimately just eats any of Jarace's minutes, not only literally, but he changes the dynamics of the team so much that Jarace was no longer going to get developmental minutes, right? Jarace saw a number of minutes over the course of the season once guys started getting hurt, and he actually saw a lot of minutes in a couple different games in March. Saw over 20 a couple times and played very well when he did. But as a whole, the Pascal Siakam trade at the trade deadline signified that Indiana was not trying to develop their young guys anymore, right? This was no longer hey, we're okay, just middling out this year, getting better in the offseason, coming back, watch some tape, and be better next year. They made a run. They made a run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. And as a rule of thumb, right, that is valuable experience for Jarace, even on the bench. Being in a locker room with Rick Carlisle that gets the Eastern Conference Finals, has another month or 2 months at this point, about to say 6 weeks, 2 months of organized practices, film sessions, game planning meetings, all the different learning things that a rookie goes through. Being in the heart of that is so important. And for what it's worth, Carlisle himself is a champion, right? Literally could not pick a better guy to do it with. Has Pascal Siakam, another champion in the same position group, doing the same things, learning the same things from him. All of these are things that, on top of the fact that he played in more games when you factor in his G League stuff as well. He played in more games in the pros than he could have even been offered to play had he stayed. As far as like game minutes go, he's playing in those games against the best of the best, right? A bunch of guys that are grown men, not college kids. I can't say this is a bad. Now, selfishly, do I wish he'd stayed at Houston because I wanted to watch him play more? Yes, watching him play for the Cougs was awesome. Like watching he and Jalen Roberts be this dynamic front court where either guy could guard either guy and they could play inside and outs. That was awesome, right? Like I'm not going to disagree with anyone there, but in putting a bow on his freshman, on his rookie year in the NBA, this was best for Jarace. On top of the fact that he's got a bajillion dollars, he's at $8 million in the bank now. It's not just about dollars and cents, right? The guy made a good basketball decision too. And I think people are like, oh, see, he didn't play. He should have stayed. But truthfully, not just because Carlisle doesn't always play as rookies, much like Sampson didn't play as freshmen, But it's not about necessarily the game minutes. It's about all the other things that involved in the development of a player and having round-the-clock shooting coaches, going deep in the playoffs. He was in games situation practices, meaning you're preparing for games from early October through mid-May, into May. I mean, that's irreplaceable experience, right? I mean, admittedly, it's not the game minutes he maybe wanted, but all of the different work and preparations kind of thing down the line is going to pay off in a big, big way for him. Can't wait to see what happens next in his career. He's making a little bit of a Pacers fan out of me, if you cannot tell. Now, breaking down things tomorrow, we got some fun stuff. We're talking more recruiting with Brian, so we'll be having Brian on tomorrow to talk about the latest in the Houston Cougar recruiting world. I think I'm right. This logjam thing, I think, will be okay. Anyway, so make sure you subscribe, like, comment, hit the bell so you know if we go live. Locked On Cougars is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, our Houston Cougars, every day. Go Cougs.